Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 3 of week 2 and Max Horkheimer is the topic of today's lecture. It is in continuation of lecture 1 and 2 of week 2. So, we will further analyze what are the important contributions of Max Horkheimer to the critical theory. We have been talking about the two types of idealism in lecture 2, where Max Horkheimer has argued that one is a rational idealism and second is the irrational idealism. Irrational idealism we are going to study now, and we have studied about the so called the idealism which is having irrational attributes, and he associated with the traditional understanding of the idealistic theory in the German idealism starting from Kant to Hegel. Irrational idealism includes the 18th and early 19th century German counter Enlightenment thought. So, all the thoughts which arose in reaction to the Enlightenment tradition, especially the German counter thought, Hume and Nietzsche. Also, there were other who were analyzed and who were also discussed by Horkheimer. Horkheimer wanted to reclaim aspects of rationalist idealism to free materialism from its so called the tendencies to reduce. And this tendency to reduce is actually responsible for so many one-sided or narrow interpretation of the social events. So, he believed that if we combine some elements of rational idealism with the so called materialism, then we can have a better understanding of society. Now, with regards to the traditional theory, he again mentioned that it is characterized by a complete disregard for the constitutive role of social life in knowledge and by a rigid anti-historical bias. So, we find the two important features which are highlighted by Max Horkheimer. The first is that in the case of traditional theory, there is total disregard of the constitutive role of social life in knowledge, how knowledge is constituted by the social forces, how the individual is socially constituted, and also having a rigid anti-historical bias. So, these are some of the arguments which were made by Horkheimer against the traditional theory. Now, Horkheimer argued that the model of physical science as they were developed in the modern era is characterized by the problems which are associated with the traditional theory, and they are the so called the dualistic character of traditional theory, in which human agency is either alienated from nature or reduced blindly to it. This is a very important phenomena or characteristic of modern society, and also one of the important weaknesses of the traditional theory which we find in the writings of Horkheimer, in which he is saying that human agency is alienated. Either he or she is alienated from nature, lost all connections, because with the rise of science and technology, we are becoming so dependent on techniques, on technology, that we are losing connection with the natural world. Now, this losing of connection is having its own repercussion. And the second important phenomena is that we are getting blindly reduced to it, or that we are making a blind submission to it. So, this is also having its own deleterious impact on the human life and on the social system. Second important feature which is highlighted or which is characterized or which is a characteristic feature of the model of physical science is that its vocation of strict universalism of methodology and result. So, this we know that it is a very important feature of science, that it is always talking about a universal set of techniques and methodology which can be universally applied across all the disciplines besides the disciplines of natural sciences. So, not only in terms of the use of methods, but also in terms of the results which are considered to be universally applicable. Like we see various theories of natural sciences, they are applicable, they are universal in nature, they are applicable everywhere. They can be tested and proved everywhere. But whether laws of social sciences can be developed in this way, this is a question mark. Second, it is non-historical in character. So, it does not take into account the connectivity of problems or the things which are being studied from a historical perspective. We have to study it by understanding it to be embedded in a historical process. So, therefore, these are some of the fundamental elements of the character of physical science, which has actually spread its tentacles across all other disciplines of the social sciences also. And the result is that we are facing problems at not only the individual level, but also at the social level, which is actually getting manifested in multiple forms. Now, when talking about science, he has raised objection to the verifiability principle. Verifiability principle is one of the important constituent or element of science. What does this mean? It means that a statement is meaningful only when it can be proven true or false by means of experience. So, any statement, any research, it is meaningful only when it can be proved either true or false by means of certain methods, by means of experience. And if cannot be proved as true or false, then it cannot be considered as science, and therefore, it is considered beyond the verifiability principle. Now, what is the consequence of this verifiability principle on the studies of our human society? Because there is no problem if we try to understand whether a certain thing is true or false, but whether all the questions can be answered in this way? Now, that is the problem which has confronted, especially with regards to the issues which has been raised in the social sciences. Now, due to the verifiability principle, all ethical and political statements are considered meaningless because they are neither true nor false, whether it is ethical principles, the ethics which are required for guiding our life, whether the political statements, they cannot also be answered in terms of yes or no. We cannot say whether a certain political statement is true or false in a very straightforward way as we can do it in the case of science. So, therefore, they are considered meaningless. So, you can see that how the major, a very major domain of our life gets no recognition or is not studied or is not considered meaningful simply because of the fact that they cannot be verified. And it has led to disengagement in politics and ethics, a very, very serious problem. And when you actually try to lose your connection with politics and ethics, then you cannot understand how changes can be brought in the society. You cannot analyze what are the reasons behind the various oppressive practices in the society. For that, you have to study the politics, you have to study the various reasons which are rooted in social, economic and political causes. So, therefore, if you are not talking about change and transformation, then we are talking about perpetuation of the status quo. That means, we want to maintain the system as it is. Now, Horkheimer argues that no philosophical theory can be truly neutral in political term. It is not possible. No philosophical theory can be neutral or can be said to be totally politically unconnected. Every philosophy is rooted in some type of politics or can be interpreted from a political perspective. So, we cannot have a disengagement with politics and ethics, which constitute an important part of our life, and also they are helpful for understanding operation and also for bringing about change and transformation in the society. Now, we know that he along with Adorno have authored a very classic work which is titled, that is Dialectic of Enlightenment. We have studied about this work in our earlier lectures also, and we have seen that how this work is considered the signature work of critical theory. It is a foundational work, and also this book is considered as the first great critical response to modernity from leftist perspective, because lots of criticism have been raised, lots of theories are prevalent which have criticized the modernity. But this is the first critical response or perspective or theory which has been done from the Marxist perspective. So, in this sense, this book is very important. It is very important to understand that it is also the first important critique of modernity from the Marxist perspective. And he has, and along with Adorno, has propounded the need for interdisciplinary research to be conducted by the Frankfurt School. He said that without adopting a interdisciplinary perspective, we cannot understand the various nuances of exploitative practices. We have to do it from the psychological perspective, we have to understand from the social, economic, political and multifarious perspective. Because we are not simply talking in economic terms, we are also analyzing the psychological aspects of exploitation. In his inaugural lecture of 1930, he stressed that the goal of Frankfurt School is to bridge the gap between narrative theory and empirical work. So, we can see that since the very beginning of the foundation of the Frankfurt School of Political Theory, and especially when he took charge as the director of that institute, he has stressed upon certain important goals and objectives, and we have seen that one of the important goal is the amalgamation of the need of theory and practice in so called conducting the researches in social sciences. In his essay titled The Authoritarian State, which was published in the year 1940, he analyzed some of the common features of modern liberalism, then communism and fascism. He said that all these grand narratives or grand ideologies which were followed by certain state across the world, they were having certain common features and they were all the product of modernity. So, we have to understand that what were the common features. We will understand the common features in this sense that all of them were characterized by bureaucratic administration and control, then propaganda and mass culture, then division of labor and mechanized work. Now, why there was so called the rise of the bureaucratic administration and control? Because we know that after the end of Second World War and the rise of the welfare state, and also the various countries in the West were responding to the demands of the workers and proletariat. So, they adopted various welfare measures. So, it actually led to the expansion of the function of the state, and with the expansion of the function led to the expansion of the bureaucracy also. And this rise of impersonal bureaucracy led to more and more control and administration of the affairs of the individual by the state. So, therefore, bureaucratic administration and control have been a rising feature after Second World War, and we find that it is making the life of the people more and more controlled, and in a way it is also getting regimented. Then the second important was the influence of propaganda and mass culture. The mass culture is the outcome of the mass society, where a particular type of culture which is characteristic of mass society, which is marked by homogeneity along with the dislocation of individual from his community and social ties, is a very important feature. Then the influence of propaganda with the rise of so many types of mass media, social media. Now, the instrument of propaganda is much more used in a massive scale by the political leaders to garner votes or to win back the support of the people. Now, it is also characterized by the so called division of labor and mechanized work, because the mechanized work means the work is being reduced to just like the parts of a machine or how a machine works. The routine, monotonous type of work has killed the creative instinct of individual, which is also one of the reason for the alienation of man from his work and from his own labor. The effect of all these have been that individual have been alienated from himself and the product of his labor and other workers. He is alienated at the multiple levels. We find that he is alienated from his work, he is alienated from himself, he is alienated from other workers in the society. And what is the impact of alienation on the workers we have studied, and we will also study in the subsequent lectures in much more detail. Now, in the work Eclipse of Reason, published in 1940, Horkheimer argued that the iron cage of bureaucracy was bringing about the end of individual. So, the bureaucracy is just like an iron cage. A cage is completely closed from all the four sides. It is made up of iron, so that the person or the animal which is placed inside, it cannot escape. And moreover, the size of the cage is always small in structure. So, in that small space, the individual is getting a type of trapped or regimented by the control of bureaucracy, which has been characterized as the iron cage of bureaucracy, which is bringing about the end of the individual, which is bringing about the end of human flourishing, which is bringing about the open sphere and space in which individual is to function and work in a free manner. So, multiple influences, multiple controls is actually reducing the autonomy of the individual at multifarious levels. So, we have to understand this from this perspective. In the dialectic of enlightenment, Horkheimer and Adorno argued that the so called celebration of reason by the thinkers of the 18th century enlightenment had led to the development of technologically sophisticated but oppressive and inhuman modes of governance, exemplified in the 20th century by rise of fascism and totalitarianism. So, you see the contradiction or the dialectic of enlightenment manifest in this statement. He said that at a time when the reason was being highlighted and it was appreciated and eulogized by the enlightenment thinkers in the 18th century, it no doubt helped in the development of our society with the rise of industrial production, modern means of communication, and also with the advancement of science and technology. It has made our life very sophisticated and very luxurious in nature. But it has also unleashed very oppressive types of governance, which is exercising control over ourselves. It is also being characterized by inhumanness of the governance, which is also a very, very negative effect of the enlightenment tradition. And this is manifest in the fact that there have been rise of so much of totalitarian tendencies between the interwar period in the form of rise of fascism and Nazism. So much of violence which took place in the 20th century that was unprecedented in nature, and never before such a large scale violence leading to destruction of so many lives and property have taken place. So, what were the reasons behind such destruction? We have to understand that, and that is because of all the ill effects and the negative effects of the Enlightenment tradition, where the rise of technology has been used in such a way that all the ideals of enlightenment have become, you can say, subdued under the rise of technology and under the banal powers of technology. One of the important aspects connected with the enlightenment tradition and use of technology is instrumental rationality, and this instrumental rationality is very much responsible for domination of nature, because today I think the most important crisis which is faced by humanity is the ecological crisis, because it is our existential crisis, it is the crisis for survival. But unfortunately, we are still unaware of the gravity of the situation. We are living in a illusory world, believing that our nature has infinite resources to satisfy our all needs and greeds. But we have forgotten that nature is also showing multiple forms of developments. In a way, somebody has characterized it as a revengeful activity of the so called exploitative practices which has been indulged in by the people in the society. So, one of the important reason is instrumental rationality, where we have used the instrument of reason to dominate people and to dominate nature for exploiting the resources for the development of human society. But what has happened? It has led to the destruction of nature, and it is raising serious questions about the survival of humanity, about the well-being of our future generation. So, ultimately these promises proved to be false, and therefore, Horkheimer has rightly said that enlightenment is a deception, because it has deceived the people into the illusions of hope and prosperity and progress, but it has led to so much of loss and so much of destruction of the natural environment, which is the very foundation for human well-being and survival. Now, this domination of outer nature also leads to domination of inner nature. So, he is talking about basically two types of domination. One is the domination of outer nature, where with the help of technology, with the help of science, the so called scientists and individuals, they have exploited and they have used the natural resources indiscriminately. But it is having intimate connection with the domination over our inner nature also, inner nature of the individual. Lohmann actually says that this is a process of desubstantialization, that is the loss of the substance or the essence. If you lose the substance or the essence of anything, then the important feature or its utility is no more in existent. It loses its charm, it loses its attractiveness, because the substance is lost, because that unique substance defines who he is or what is the character of that substance. Now, this means that nature loses its own substance, and this happens not only in the case of outer nature, but also inner nature, because of the functionalization of our desires and drives. So, the nature is also losing its substance, and our inner nature is also losing its substance, and the result is that, or you can say it is getting manifested in the form of functionalization of our desires and drives. Now, what does that mean? It means that our desires are constructed in such a way that they can provide guide for the technological and industrial activity that makes use of outer nature. So, it is in a way preparing our inner self in such a way, in such a direction that we may facilitate and we may agree with the process in which the exploitation of the outer nature is taking place. So, by extracting the substance of our inner nature, we are trying to extract the substance of the outer nature or the natural world. So, both are connected with each other. We cannot separate the one from the other. Now, the progress generated by enlightenment have created barbarism and domination. Various forms of barbaric practices have been, you can see, it is manifest in the modern society. Who is responsible for this? Modernity was supposed to bring human civilization to reach a very glorious level with lots of progress and prosperity. It was believed that the human civilization will reach all the glorious heights. But on the contrary, we found that it has unleashed so much of destruction, so much of barbarous practices, and these practices are increasing day by day. You can see the type of violence which is perpetuated in the society and the type of armaments which are getting manufactured, the intensity which they can perpetuate and the range of killings which they can unleash. It is increasing with every scientific discovery and innovation. So, we have to understand that on the one hand we are reaching the pinnacle of glory and progress, and on the other hand we are reaching the lowest heights of all types of uncivilized and barbaric practices. How can we understand and make an interpretation of this dialectic? And therefore, it is leading to the erosion of autonomy. In the chapter The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as mass deception, which is part of the book so called Dialectic of Enlightenment, Horkheimer and Adorno argue that how popular culture is akin to a factory producing standardized goods, films, radio programs, magazines, etc., that are used to manipulate mass society into passivity. So, just see that how he is picturizing the various complexities which has been created because of the advent of mass society, because of the advent of mass media and communication. He is saying that the popular culture is just being produced as it is produced in any other consumer goods industry, and they can be seen in the types of films which are produced, in the types of serials which are produced, in the type of programs or news or magazines or articles. You can see that there is a very peculiar feature of standardization, and they are being deliberately put forward or manufactured just like any other commodity to manipulate the people in the mass society into passivity. So, objective is that they no more stay as an active citizen, but they become passive citizens. So, when you become passive citizen, you cannot raise voices, you cannot question, and you cannot ask for change and transformation in the society. One of the inherent danger of culture industry is the cultivation of false need, and it can be satisfied only by the products of capitalism. So, there are multifarious the negative effects of capitalism, and one of them is creation of artificial needs. The advertising industry is creating so many artificial needs in us by putting certain products in a way that excites our imagination and stimulates us to use them. So, it creates false needs and they are satisfied only by the capitalist production, whereas the true needs of human beings are human freedom, creativity, genuine happiness. So, in spite of we are continuously satisfying our needs, we still are unhappy because we are not satisfying our genuine needs, we are only trying to satisfy our false needs, and this is one of the paradoxes of modern society. Now, Horkheimer and Adorno have made consistent comparison between fascist Germany and American film industry. Both highlights the presence of mass produced culture, created and also disseminated by exclusive institution and consumed by a passive homogenized audience in both systems. So, he has made a very interesting analogy between the German fascism and the American film industry. Both are actually putting out same standardized mass culture, same ideology, same norms, and in a way they are in their respective situation are trying to produce a passive homogenized culture and background, and that is being consumed by the homogenized audience on a daily basis. And the culture industry leads to so called the commercial marketing of culture that leads to denial or undervaluing of authentic culture. We have seen already that how the paintings, original paintings, then the poetry and so many other traditional arts, they are getting undervalued because of the commercial marketing of culture. Horkheimer argued that the culture industry promotes consumerism in people and industrially produced culture robs them of their imagination and thinking process. Now, this is a very serious problem, because when we are constantly into the process of consuming, then that becomes our primary objective, and it also helps in a way it robs us of our imagination and thinking process. Now, authentic culture helps in fostering human imagination by presenting suggestions and possibilities which are different from the culture industry. But we are not being faced with the authentic culture, we are staying in a mass society having so called the mass culture. Now, culture industry is completely commercial because its objective is maximization of profits. So, we can see that how at the multifarious levels Horkheimer has tried to draw our attention to the ills which has been created because of the capitalist society, because of the Enlightenment tradition, and what has been the effect of the so called the mass society and the modern means of communication on the culture industries. So, we can see that he has not only talked about the need for critical theory and what is a critical theory and how it is different from traditional theory, but he has also touched upon so many issues which are of relevance to all of us even now in the present society. So, with that I come to the end of this lecture, followed by certain questions like explain the negative effects of enlightenment, what is the impact of culture industry on society, how instrumental rationality has led to domination of nature. With this I come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much.